Hey all. I want to say a few things about the politics of Congress beyond what's already posted. I'll be tracking some of the elements of Chapter 6 in our text, American Government in Black and White, and then I'll add some sort of current events updates very briefly. All right, so as our authors note, Congress, in many cases to the great frustration of the American people, was designed in many ways to be sort of geared towards gridlock. Right? You got the House, you got the Senate, they have to agree in order to get things done. And in this hyper-polarized era in which we're living, where Democrats and Republicans are pretty far apart, it's really having difficulty sort of being functional these days. I think we're all for limited government, right? And a Congress that doesn't act too quickly, but some would say, well, but this is ridiculous. Other things they note here at the outset, right? You can't understand the politics of Congress unless you know about the politics of our two major political parties, because that's how we organize the Congress, and that's what drives its politics, right? Democrats and Republicans. Leadership is key to understanding what goes on in Congress, right? Whether that's the Speaker of the House. And by the way, the Speaker of the House basically represents the majority party in the House, which right now is, of course, Democrats, right, with Nancy Pelosi as the Speaker. You also have the House Minority Leader, Kevin McCarthy out of California. You've got the House Majority Leader, who's basically Nancy Pelosi's number two. I don't even know who that is. Right? Leadership is often what sort of drives what happens in the House and the Senate. Right now we have Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer out of New York and Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell out of Kentucky. And then they also have like their number twos, their number threes. You know, they have a small leadership team. Our authors also point out that some number of Americans are denied representation in the U.S. Congress. One might ask questions about that. I've got questions. Right? If you are living in Puerto Rico or Guam or the Northern Marianas Islands or the Virgin Islands, you are American, but you don't get representation in Congress. I think District of Columbia, well, I know it doesn't get representation. They get a non-voting member, but that's a non-voting member in the House, and that's it. So there are really questions about that, right? Remember, one of the ignition points for the American Revolution was no taxation without representation. And again, if you're living in Puerto Rico or Guam or the Northern Marianas Islands or the District of Columbia, you're getting taxed without representation. Questionable. Our authors also point out the critical role of what's just gone down. There's still some sort of litigation that's ongoing, but for now I think we have the line set for the 2022 midterms, how you draw electoral boundaries within each state for the House of Representatives. So they go through that quite a bit, which we already talked about in, I think, one of the previous chapters on civil rights. But check that out. Things like majority-minority districts, the Voting Rights Act, the 14th Amendment, and how all that gets worked out from, typically every 10 years. States actually can redraw lines more often than every 10 years, but most don't. It's very rare to do that because it's a bloodbath every time, and it's not advisable to do it more than once a decade. Our authors point out that Black and Latino representation in the U.S. Congress has improved over time. That's certainly worth noting. Now, the vast majority of Black and Latino and Asian American members are Democrats. That is changing. The Republicans have realized they need to sort of step into the present and the future, and they're working harder to recruit Black, Latino, Asian American, and Indigenous candidates who are still Republican, but they're people of color. So they're moving in the right direction. And I believe for this current upcoming cycle, they've recruited quite a few. That's clearly a good thing, all things being equal. There are some informal caucuses on Capitol Hill. The ones that our authors take note of, right, is the Congressional Black Caucus, the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. They basically, it's a kind of a working group of Black and Latino and allies who can, meet from time to time about what issues are most important to them and how they could advance that in the U.S. Congress. The Senate filibuster still in place. That's a Senate rule. It's not in the Constitution. It can be changed at any time by the party that controls the Senate. Same in the House. Those are just rules that change every 2 years. Nothing set in stone there. But the filibuster right in the Senate has quite a tradition. And although some Democrats would like to get rid of it, that's not going to happen. And it has sort of too long of a tradition there, I think, to be disrupted. Although it has been disrupted, right? It in many ways minimized the significance of the filibuster. It no longer can be used for presidential nominations to the federal courts at any level. It can no longer be used to thwart presidential nominations to the executive branch bureaucracy. And it can be avoided, right, through what's called budget reconciliation on bills that are primarily about the budget. So if you're going to do voting rights, you can't do that through budget reconciliation, because although that might have some impact on the federal budget, that's not what it's primarily about, right? So issues that can be done in that way increasingly are done in that way to avoid the filibuster by the majority party, right? Democrats did a lot of that early on in the Biden administration to get some of those stimulus packages passed during the pandemic. They did that through budget reconciliation. They were indeed primarily, if not exclusively, about the budget, and those could not be filibustered. And to break a filibuster, right, under current Senate rules, you need 60 votes, 60. How many seats do the Democrats have? 50. So that's been a limit on what they can get done. They need 10 Republicans, or 9. 10. They would need 10. And in order to just win straight up, right, with things like budget reconciliation or judicial nominations or executive branch nominations, they need to hold all 50 Democrats together, right? And that hasn't always been the case. We know that Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, Manchin out of West Virginia, Sinema out of Arizona, they've limited what Democrats can get done because they're relatively conservative Democrats and have put the brakes on some of that Biden agenda. All right. And, that kind of captures what I wanted to say, too, about current events. A lot of the action, since in the House, right, majority dominates, even if it's a thin majority, as long as they can hold together their caucus, which Nancy Pelosi has, because she's really a good leader, effective. So the House Democrats can get things done, right, but Senate Democrats have a much harder time because they need all 50. And there's a more of a tradition of independence in the Senate by individual senators of both parties. And so it's been often frustrating for Joe Biden to need all 50 Democrats in the Senate to get things done, because that's often not possible. And the midterms are coming up. It's a very favorable climate for the Republican Party this time around, right? The party that holds the presidency typically gets whacked in the midterms, only a few exceptions in our entire history. This one looks like it'll be pretty typical, especially because Biden is so unpopular. He's around 40% approval. So I think, congressional Republicans are understandably optimistic about their chances in 2022. It seems like there's no significant doubt that Democrats will lose the House and Republicans will regain control with presumably Representative McCarthy out of California as the new Speaker of the House starting in January of 2023. So Biden's not going to like that, right? That's going to be quite the show. Lots of House investigations of the Biden administration. It's going to be something else. A very adversarial environment. And in the Senate, now that one looks like it's 50-50. Even though right now it's 50-50, the chances that it'll flip are 50-50. Does that make sense? Looks like the Democrats have a reasonably good chance of keeping control. Turns out that a lot of their incumbents that are up for re-election are in states that Biden won in 2020. So the political landscape for Democrats in this particular Senate cycle is quite favorable. So that favorable landscape of which seats are coming up, right? Because 1/3 of the seats come up every 2 years in the Senate. It's staggered right across all 3 cycles. This is a good cycle for Democrats, a good cycle for them. So that should counteract the Republican advantage in terms of who holds the White House. In fact, one of the absolute key races. Now, so I think Senate Republicans have sort of booted away some of their chances needlessly. They're running Herschel Walker in Georgia. That seems like a mistake to me. He's got so much baggage, and he's kind of an idiot. That hasn't stopped a lot of people from winning at Senate races, but I think it might stop Herschel Walker in what is otherwise going to be a close election, and it might still be close. But Herschel Walker is a deeply flawed candidate running against Raphael Warnock. So that may be one that Republicans have booted away by nominating someone who's kind of an idiot, and they could have done better. I think that's happened in a few races, like in, Pennsylvania, Dr. Oz, kind of a medical charlatan. I don't even know if he still has his medical license. But he's also not a great candidate. And Democrats think they can win that one as well, actually steal a seat away from the Republicans. Because Pat Toomey, right, is stepping down Republican, and Oz is running to replace him, and John Fetterman seems to have a good lead on him. And in Wisconsin, you got Ron Johnson, who's the incumbent Republican, right, senator. So it's almost impossible to deny an incumbent renomination to run again. Will happen in Wisconsin. Johnson will get renominated coming up in the next couple weeks to run for the Republicans, but he looks weak because he has all sorts of problems, including playing a role in trying to get fake slates of electors to vote for Donald Trump instead of Joe Biden out of states like Wisconsin. So and Ron Johnson's just he's kind of a hot mess. So Democrats think they can also take that seat. So candidate quality still matters. People don't vote blindly in partisan fashion. So I think Republicans have some candidate quality issues, and Democrats have a favorable landscape in terms of which seats are coming up. And then on the other side, right, Republicans have the structural advantage of Biden holds the White House and he's unpopular. So it's looking like it could end up 50-50, just as it is now, which means, right, Democrats control because Kamala Harris is the tiebreaker as our vice president. That being said, it's 50-50, right? Republicans have an equally good chance of winning the Senate. Normally, you think they would win it easily, but for the reasons I just mentioned, it's going to be really close. I'd actually give a lean to the Democrats right now. Things could change, right? It's not till November. Things could change. But right now, I give a little bit of an edge to the Democrats holding the Senate. And then I give a massive edge to Republicans winning back the House. So that's what we have to look forward to, or not to look forward to, in January of 2023. Thanks all.